Now, Australia, as you know, is a land of opportunity, especially for New Zealanders. Look, we love our Kiwi cousins, and hello to our viewers across the ditch tonight. About 600,000 New Zealanders live in this country right now. They enjoy a privilege that people from no other country enjoy, and that is they don't have to apply for a visa to live and work here. But a tiny minority of Kiwis think they can abuse that entitlement without consequences. That is, those who commit serious criminal offences here and then object to the fact they are deported back home. Predictably, the progressive media in Australia is sympathetic to their cause. The Guardian headline screams here, deported to a land they barely know. Anger rises over Australia's character test for non-citizens. And it goes on to say the number of people deported after committing offences is set to explode if laws are strengthened, to the dismay of the New Zealand government. Now, as it stands, New Zealanders in Australia can be deported only if they've received a prison sentence of 12 months or more. A bill before the Parliament now would expand that category to cover other instances. As The Guardian says, the offences include violence against a person, weapons offences, breaching of an apprehended violence order, and non-consensual sexual acts punishable by at least 2 years in prison. Fair enough, you'd think. Commit such a crime in Australia and you're not a citizen here, then you're no longer welcome. But one activist, Filipa Payne, described by The Guardian as someone who advocates for New Zealanders' rights in Australia, is most put out. She's quoted as saying, as more people are deported and the federal government tries to broaden the scope under which they can be deported, she believes New Zealand will be the epicentre for change. This is The Guardian report. We'll end up having boycotts, sports teams not willing to play in Australia, a disconnect in the Pacific because of the abuse Australia continues to inflict, says Payne. Now, in fairness to her, she's merely adopting New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's populist stance. Remember her unseemly tantrum in Sydney a couple of years ago?
The New Zealand and Australia relationship is being tested.
She's incensed by Scott Morrison's insistence on deporting New Zealanders after they commit a crime here. That's even if they have spent most of their life here and don't even have a home in New Zealand.
Send back Kiwis, genuine Kiwis. Do not deport your people and your problems.
Yeah, well, we can't deport people if they have an Australian passport, and we can't deport them to New Zealand unless they are Kiwis. But when it comes to Payne, Filipa Payne and her protests, where have we heard that name before?
The hikoi is another step in Filipa Payne's plan to take a class action lawsuit against the Australian government for its hardline immigration policy and treatment of deportees.
I 100% believe that we can win this class action. I wouldn't be taking this step if I didn't have a faith that we were going to do it.
Yeah, so she's pretty ardent and pretty active, and she's got a partisan media in New Zealand amplifying her outrage.
And what I would like to say as an observer of Australian politics is that every time they get into trouble in Australia, Australian politicians like to blame a foreigner. So we saw the Pacific solution, Manus Island, you know, I mean, this is just bog standard cynical Australian politics. At what stage does New Zealand have to say this isn't fit and proper treatment? And actually, we are treating people in these detention centres worse than they would have been treated had they been in prison.
Australian politicians like to lash out at a foreigner, says the angry New Zealand journalist. Did he not spot the irony in that statement? Not to mention the hysterical claim that Kiwi detainees are treated worse than prisoners. Now, Payne and her cohort might want to look closer to home, I reckon. As New Zealand's Newsroom reported in 2019, there's plenty of hypocrisy in the country's outrage. Over the previous 5 years, it noted, 1,040 people have been deported to the Pacific from New Zealand. What's more, those who have dealt with deportees told Newsroom some have not stepped foot in their country of birth since they were children and no longer have family and cultural ties and are at a high risk of reoffending, especially with a lack of social services and reintegration programs. Really? Could New Zealand be doing to Pacific Islanders exactly what it complains about Australia doing to Kiwis?
They indefinite banned me from New Zealand. It was very sad.
I feel like I did my punishment. I've been here 6 years and I still feel like home is back home, like a Kiwi. I went to jail, served my time, but this is what the New Zealand government wants. My youngest son is almost 4. Yeah, that's real hard, you know? I hate that I can't be with them. You don't know that feeling until you have kids.
Oh, yes, spare us this hypocrisy, hey? As for what's driving Payne and other New Zealanders demanding the Australian government change its policy, it's nothing but a mentality of entitlement. You'd think we were forcing them to come over here.
It's not just people go there and decide to be a criminal, it's the fact that we don't get support in Australian society to sustain us at a standard to keep our families healthy. So before we put the accountability on criminal activity, I think the accountability should go on the Australian government, that they invite us into their country to work there, to be
build the roads, to work in the mines,
to build their gyms, to do their stadiums, but they will not give us any sort of support. And from that, people are going through adversity.
We invite the Kiwis over, they build our roads and whatever, and we don't support them? Really? This is rubbish. Apart from the visa-free entry and the work rights, we offer all kinds of welfare payments and benefits to New Zealanders. We love our Kiwi cousins. The only problem here is people breaking the law. When people commit serious crimes, guess what? They forfeit certain privileges, which is just how New Zealand seems to see it for its Pacific neighbours.